Good morning, everyone. It's Pablo Swanich at Swanich and Associates, Cannabis Equity Analyst here. I have the pleasure of introducing Michael DeGiglio, CEO and President of Village Farms International, and Orville Bovenschen, President of Pure Sunfarms, and Leli, Holland. The purpose of this call is to discuss the Dutch pilot. Welcome, Michael and Orville, and thank you for taking the time to do this.
Hello, Pablo. Good to see you again.
So look, we have a lot to cover here, although the focus will be on the Dutch pilot, of course. But Michael, let's start first. Just a reminder of the Village Farms global footprint and strategy, and what makes you different from other NASDAQ-listed licensed producers. And then also remind us, how does Leli Holland fit into your strategy? Thanks.
Sure. I'll just touch on a couple things. We're proud of being one of the largest legal growers of cannabis on the planet, and we're actually doubling down on cannabis rather than diversifying our business away from cannabis, global cannabis, like we're seeing other LPs doing, especially in Canada. Currently, we have 1.8 million square feet of operational cannabis cultivation in British Columbia, Canada. That it also includes our subsidiary in Quebec as well. We also have an additional 3.1 million square feet adjacent to our British Columbia footprint of incremental high-tech greenhouses, which will enable us to continue to grow as the market grows. We're focused on driving profitable sales growth in Canada. We've been doing so for quite a few quarters, if not a couple of years. We've been EBITDA positive since our first quarter in cannabis. We're investing in attractive international cannabis markets, which are taking, which the governments there, we feel, are taking a much more pragmatic, rational approach to regulations, especially as compared to the U.S. Leli, Holland for us represents a tremendous opportunity for us, and we have an expanding medical business out of Canada now to 5 countries and expanding, which we've said we expect to triple in sales in 2025 from 2024. We also have almost 6 million square feet of high-tech greenhouse in Texas as a potential for the future U.S. market entry, and operate one of the largest e-commerce platforms in the United States for CBD and hemp-derived products out of Colorado. I just will say the U.S. is still sort of in a confused state, but we are hopeful that our assets, or some of our assets in Texas, will become viable in the future. So how does Leli Holland fit? We believe Leli Holland represents one of the most attractive limited license jurisdiction or countries actually for cannabis in the world today. Our company has tremendous deep roots going back almost 40 years in Dutch growing techniques. So the Leli investment represents somewhat of a homecoming in many ways for us, coming back there in our team. We have a very high level of Dutch leadership in our company, and it's great to be there. So that's sort of the overview of where we are today.
That's great, Michael. Thank you. So look, Orville, before we touch on the Dutch pilot, can we talk about the current state of the Dutch market? Talk about, there's about 500 plus coffee shops. They sell cannabis for recreational use. Just talk about how the system works right now outside of the pilot, the total, what was happening in Holland before the pilot started.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time, Pablo. It's very good to be here. First of all, I think we're in a current very interesting time. A lot of people think that cannabis is legal in the Netherlands up until April 7th, but it was decriminalized. So that means you could sell if you have a license to sell, and you could buy cannabis and you could consume it freely. Now, with cannabis, I mean flower and hash and pre-rolls, and in certain municipalities, edibles. But the production of cannabis has always been illegal. So where coffee shops will get their supply, the government looked away. They didn't want to know, they didn't care. And society just didn't agree with that anymore. Society came to a point that, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you take something that is decriminalized / legal, take illegal money, and it flows into the black market? So the Dutch government decided to make a change. And then 2 years ago, the pilot program came to life, where they would have a limited number of municipalities and coffee shops North America, it's better known as a dispensary. In the Netherlands, we call it a coffee shop, to allow for legal acquisition of flower. And for the first time in history, as of April 7th, this is fully transitioned, where the coffee shop can only buy from the legal producers in the Netherlands. Now, this is restricted to 10 municipalities first, roughly 80 coffee shops. The entire country has around 500 coffee shops. So it's a big change for the Dutch legal market. So also the status of the coffee shop has changed.
Correct. So before we jump into the pilot itself, let's talk about, those 500 coffee shops. Do consumers go there and consume for take there at the store, at the shop, or do they take it home? Is the assortment wide? Does the consumer pay a sales tax on those cannabis? Just talk about how that system works right now.
Go ahead, Orville.
So it's very much, it depends. And I don't like to give the answer, it depends, but it very much depends on the consumer. It very much depends on the coffee shops. You have all kinds of varieties. You have the coffee shop that look like an Apple store. You have the coffee shop that look like a living room, where people come and people actually sit down and consume. And it's for them, it's a social thing. So they sit down, they consume the cannabis inside the coffee shop. It's very different than the Canadian model where this is not allowed. And for them, it's like I said, it's a social meeting place where people meet each other. And they do this on a daily basis, and they've been doing it for a very, very long time. Now, the consumer doesn't pay sales tax on the products that they buy in the coffee shops themselves. But it's a very different model than the Canadian model, and it's also a much older model than the Canadian model. You can imagine, I think the first coffee shop in Amsterdam, I think it was Mellow Yellow, it opened in 1974, 1975, so they have a massive head start looking at other markets.
Yeah, so they don't pay taxes, the consumer. That's, I guess, an important point in your question about how is it different. The other thing, and we may touch on it later, and Orville can talk more to it, but the ones that are not consuming in a coffee shop, that are just buying and taking home, let's say, or out of the dispensary model, pretty much will just buy enough for that day. And sort of a culture to come back each day. So consequently, we pack a lot of 1 gram bags. You want to touch on that, Orville?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain it, the Dutch are, going Dutch there's a reason for having that saying. We are notoriously cheap, so we don't like to spend a lot of money. So even if we spend the exact same amount of money in a week, we like to make sure that we spend the amount of money a day, so we don't spend it all at once. So that's where it comes from. We are notoriously cheap.
And do we have a sense of how big is the market? And I'm sorry, we want to touch on the pilot, but just in terms of that market, those 500 plus 560 coffee shops, do we have a sense of the size of the market? How much sales do we have, roughly?
So that has always been very difficult to determine. We have done studies, or before the Dutch government actually went to the pilot program, they went to the coffee shops and asked, how much are you actually selling? It has always been very, very difficult to determine because a lot of the sales were non-registered sales. People didn't really know, but it's safe to assume it's well over €1 billion.
Right. Okay. I mean, the comment I would make there is that, when I think of the 500, we have a country the size of a population, slightly smaller than Florida, but not that much smaller, 1/4 the size, right? And you have this variety of shops. We've calculated, I think it's like when you do the math, plenty of shops based on the population compared to other states in the US. But that billion plus number turns out about $80 per capita, right? So it's there's room for that number to be much higher in our opinion. So that's opportunity from what I would call a more regulated license system. So look, let's just move the discussion now to the pilot. You touched on it, Orville or Michael. Let's start with the production side. How does the production side of the pilot work? How many licensed producers are there? Let's start with that. Michael or Orville.
Well, I'll start it off and then hand some to Orville. But so as I said earlier, it's 18 million people in the Netherlands. So it's quite concentrated. And there were 10 licenses issued initially, and it's still at 10 licenses. Of the 10 license holders, 7 are in production, us being one of them. The other three, as far as we know, are not in production yet. So, and the minimum that the Dutch government established early on is 6,500 kilos per license holder. So, and some are doing more, some are doing less, but overall, that was the target goal that they have. And for us, I say in a humble way, but I'm serious when I say that our quality is really probably the best that's ever been in the Dutch market. And two reasons for that. One is, we've rolled forward a 40-year history of cultivation and approaching almost 10 years specific in cannabis, coupled with the fact, so that know-how and knowledge that we have has resonated well. And then, for the most part, competing with the illicit trade has never been able to really produce high quality, be it grown in the Netherlands or coming in from other countries, just because of the illicit trade. Of course, you can get into safety and of the product as well. But if you're growing illegally, you have to try to grow the crop very quickly, so you're not going to do the type of processing and drying that you would do for a craft type product. Our facilities, the one we have and the one we're constructing, are both indoor facilities as well, where the controls are really at the very top along with the technology. Orville, you want to add any color to that?
No, I think it's fascinating to see where we see cross-pollination between the different entities that we have. Having that large scale agricultural background really puts you apart. It's not an easy crop to grow, right? If you look at a different crop, you plant it once a year and you reap the benefits the entire year. This crop, it's multiple cycles a year. If you do everything well, 5.5, 6 cycles a year. So it's very, very different. Having that knowledge in-house and having basically your own consultancy firm with all the growers they have internally gives you a massive head start, a massive advantage. And doing it for this long is a real benefit.
Yeah, and we've heard from others who have visited the other facilities who've given us kudos on our product, but more importantly, the feedback from the marketplace has been really terrific for us. So, incidentally, we started the whole process there as from seed, not cuttings. That was the first time we've done that full scale with great results as well. So.
For the audience that's not so familiar with the technical side, Michael, explain that in terms of why is that important, starting from seeds and not cuttings? I mean, just expand on that briefly.
Well, I think the future will be in seed. I mean, if you look at any other type of crop, there are crops today like chrysanthemums that still start from cuttings, maybe even roses. But for the most part, in the future, I think you will be seeing hybrid seeds coming and getting the genetics right over years, just like any other agricultural product. I don't care if it's protein or, beef or fruit or vegetables. Ultimately, to control the genetics, you have to go to seed. So it's a cleaner start, and it mitigates certain disease pressures. And we wanted to keep it very sterile and clean as a closed facility from day one. But there's not many doing seed today, but I think it certainly is the future going forward.
That's great. And then when you talked about that 6.5 metric tons, is that like a cap or a floor? And are all the 7 producers, you think, at that level already?
It's like a floor.
Okay.
Because the key was, in order for the coffee shops, as Orville indicated, to be 100% only buying those 80 coffee shops in phase 1, okay, can only buy from the legal coffee shop. So if they can't get the capacity, the experiment wouldn't work. So thus you have a floor as a minimum.
Right. And do you have a cap?
No.
All right. No, that's good. That's good.
The cap would be based on how many coffee shops and how many competitors and the capacity coming out of each to meet the market demand for those 80 coffee shops.
Right. But I mean, I don't know if you can provide this metric, but we can assume then right now that you would be already above 6.5.
Well, we'll be, once we finish phase 2 going into the new year, on an annualized run rate, we'll be at least 10,000 kilos.
Right.
For us.
Can you say where you are right now?
We're about close to 3,000 kilos on an annual run rate.
All right. And then just staying on that point on the producer, we'll touch on the coffee shops, the 80 coffee shops, Orville, in a second. But do we have a sense of what's going to happen with the other 3 licensed producers? I mean, are those licenses, not going to be active? And could you be in a position to buy other licensees if you wanted to, or that's not allowed? And I think you have 2 facilities. Will it be efficient for you to merge the 2 facilities? If you can talk about that, just briefly.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. We talk about it all the time. So I think the Dutch government will decide what they're going to do with the other 3 license holders that have not started. Now, obviously, with the capital requirements and the timing on phase 1, and we can talk a little bit about what's the future. But if you were starting today, I would think it would be difficult to get a break even with the timeline for phase 1 when the decision will be made, go full bore or curtail there or whatnot. So I could see it's a problem for the 3 license holders. They don't have the time, and this is in our opinion, they don't have the time right now to get to the finish line in time. So the Dutch government has to decide what they're going to do with the other 3 license holders. As far as growth, yeah, we're pretty open in the Netherlands. As I said, it's not just pragmatic. It's an incredible country from a commerce perspective, not handcuffing the players in there. So M&A is possibility, maybe getting other licenses, vertical integration, and owning dispensaries or coffee shops, all part of probably the future that we're looking at.
All right, that's good. Thank you. Orville, just moving on to the, I don't know if it's 80 or 85 coffee shops. Just remind us how many municipalities are in the program. Are all the coffee shops in those cities, in those towns in the program? What percent of the population, does the program capture? If you can touch on that first.
So there's 10 municipalities that are in the program, and some of them are bordering Belgium or Germany. So it's very difficult for me. I don't have the top of my head what the actual population of the municipality is, but they're good municipalities from a perspective that they're old coffee shops, so they've been there for a long time. It's not that they are not viable. Those coffee shops that are there are quite viable from a financial perspective. So the demand in those municipalities is very, very strong. We see that daily with the demand that we have for our product, which also speaks to the quality that we currently produce. But the demand in the municipalities is very, very strong.
Right. And then to be clear, I think you said starting April 7th, those coffee shops, the 80 coffee shops, have to buy only from the licensed producers, right? And that's what's happening right now. How is that being enforced? If you can touch on that, Orville.
Yeah, so April 7th, the Dutch government started the pilot program. They made one exception, and there was the hash. So the coffee shops can still buy hash for an additional 2 months from the illicit market. Now, why did they do that? Because obviously it takes time for the producers to ramp up production. So you get the flower production first. It takes a little bit of time before you dial in your processes. You have stable flower production, and then you go into hash production. Hash production costing additional time. So it gave the LPs a little more time, and it also gave the coffee shops a little more breathing room because they were concerned that there wouldn't be enough hash to supply to the Dutch consumer. To me, again, it shows how different the Dutch government is and how willing they are to listen to both sides of the table and say, hey, I'm going to listen to the coffee shops, I'm going to listen to the producers, and ultimately trying to make this a success. So I'm very, very optimistic there too.
Yeah. A couple of points there. So I think for the audience, and correct me if I'm wrong, the sales mix in most of these shops is 60% flour, 20% hash, 15% pre-rolls, and then the rest, right? And then you're saying that 20% that will be hash, they can buy from other sources, but eventually you yourselves will be producing hash also. When can you talk about when Village Farms will be supplying hash in Holland? Or no? Don't answer if you don't want.
I can, but it's probably 2 months from now. So we are exactly on that timeline of making sure that we're going to hit. But it takes time to produce good hash, and the Dutch consumer is very used to a certain type of hash that we're trying to recreate, but it's not that easy. The Canadian consumer has a very different hash than the Dutch consumer. Right. The easiest way to explain it, probably And because of our facility in Quebec that we have, and we know that consumer there to our Rose LifeSciences entity very, very well. The Quebec consumer and the Dutch consumer are very, very similar in the way they consume cannabis. So the hash in Quebec has a THC limit of 30%. Now in the Netherlands, there's no THC limit, so anything is allowed. But the Dutch consumer is very used to smoking or consuming hash at around 30%. So if all of a sudden I produce hash at 60, 70% purity, it will be a bit of a shock to the Dutch consumer. So it's a slow transition where we try to have an evolution within the Dutch consumer as well, introduce him to new form factors that they're not used to right now.
Look, I want to staying on the same subject, of course. In terms of shop owners right now, they are supposed to buy from the licensed producers, right? And this just began April 7th. But how will this be enforced from a government side? Do we have a sense of that? It's too early to tell, or we expect it will be enforced?
I can guarantee you it will be enforced. So you'll have the government actually will actively check inventory from coffee shops in the municipality. Everything is in a central system called track and trace, designed by the government. So I track everything in that system, and so does the coffee shop. So the government has direct visibility on what's actually happening, and they'll be auditing the coffee shop, making sure that all the inventory that they have matches the inventory that was shipped from the LPs. If there is a discrepancy, that coffee shop will lose their license most likely.
Yeah, and that's really an important point because where Orville was saying that the Dutch government wants this to work, wants everybody to win, very supportive and listening to both sides, and very much behind this program. On the other hand, though, unlike what we see in the US and Canada, they will enforce, not just at the coffee shops, but there's zero tolerance for illegal grow in Holland. If you get caught, your life is pretty well ruined. And kudos to that, because to make a program really work and work well, you have to have enforcement. And I can't say enough about that. Living it through other countries that we operate in where enforcement is not serious. So that's a big deal.
Got it. And then the same question, but from a consumer point of view, right? Let's say I'm in Almere, right? And that's one of the 10 cities in the pilot. If I'm not happy with the supply in those coffee shops in Almere, because now they are only buying from licensed producers, I can just drive or bike, I guess, to Amsterdam. That may sound a lot simpler than saying it, right? But I'm just trying to understand from a consumer point of view, how do you think that will play out? Or will people from other cities that don't have licensed coffee shops come to the 10 municipalities? So, it's a two-way street. I don't know if you want to touch on that. And I know it's early to say, Orville, but how would that play out, do you think? Because, I think perspective, if I'm in a town that's unlicensed, right, and I can go to another town that's licensed, I'm buying a licensed product, probably tested, safer, as Michael said, better quality. I'm just trying to understand how that traffic is going to work, out or in, from a consumer standpoint.
I think in the beginning there was a lot of skepticism from the consumer saying, will there be the varieties that we need in order to have what we have now? But quite early, we saw coffee shops, as soon as it was allowed, moving to 100% of legal supply, and the consumer being very perceptive to it for the exact same reasons Mike said, you just said. The safety component is a big component, right? If you have an illicit grow, people use all kinds of hormones to accelerate the flowering stage of the plant, which is quite dangerous. So you find heavy metals, all kinds of pesticides in that flower. And I have to say, the quality of the flower that we produce is significantly better than the quality of the illicit market, because we can take the time. So if the flowering cycle of a plant for a true sativa being 14 weeks, we can take those 14 weeks. If someone cultivates cannabis illegally, they will not be able to take that risk. They have to harvest at the week 9, week 10. So very, very early in the process. So from what we're seeing right now, we see more people coming towards the municipalities having the legal supply than the other way around.
Yeah, I think also I would say that the Dutch consumer, based on everything Orville mentioned, safety, security, but also quality, if they weren't so shrewd with their dollars and you didn't have to drive more than 1 mile over the speed limit to get a ticket, they would be traveling more to the legal coffee shops, but of course that costs money and speeding tickets.
Half a mile over.
Now, on the whole subject, Michael, I mean, in terms of vertical integration, will it make sense for Village Farms to start buying coffee shops at some point, or that's out of the question?
No, I think it does make sense. Look, you know, I would just say the way we look at these markets, I don't care if it's a US, Canada, emerging legal cannabis markets. We always have to take sort of a very prudent approach and be very patient. This industry today, for the most part, it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 back. And eventually the day will come where it's 3 steps forward and nothing back. So as we're in this sort of twilight zone, we want to be very pragmatic with our investments and capital allocation. But it's certainly in the cards to do a lot more than Netherlands. We're very excited about it. But we have to manage with prudence and patience. So this project, the process just started. You know, we timed it perfectly. We wanted to make sure that the toothpaste wasn't going back into the tube here. And even though one day it may, I mean, you see things like Texas today, what they're talking about, not that this call is about that, but that's so all these other possibilities in the Netherlands are possible for us, including looking at a vertical where it really makes sense there more than many other places right now.
Right.
The other thing is, you know, I can guarantee other countries, as they look at recreational legalization beyond medical in the future, and it will happen, you know, can serve as a great springboard for us with the know-how and knowledge we have and the know-how and knowledge and experience we're gaining in the Netherlands. So right. I don't think the future is only limited to the Netherlands for us as well.
And Orville, I mean, when we talk about the pilot, I think they talk about a 5-year program. Do we know if more cities are going to be added to the program over those 5 years? How do things play out, or is just a 5-year test for those 80 shops?
It's difficult to predict the future, right? These are our political decisions, and I'm in no position to speak on behalf of politicians in the Netherlands. I know the sentiment in society is very much in favor of the pilot program. So if current politics is reflecting sentiments in society, then yes, but politics are very, very difficult to predict. I know a lot of coffee shops, after being a bit skeptic, and a lot of municipalities and mayors, particularly after being skeptic, now seeing the benefit of this and would like to add their municipality and their coffee shops to the experiment. But again, you need to have the political will, and this is decided ultimately by Parliament, and I'm in no position to comment on any decisions Parliament would make.
Right. And on that point, I look up, for those of you asking, for the audience, right, the way we deal with questions, we don't take live questions, but please email them to me or put them on the chat here in Zoom, and I will read some of them. But just to stay on the dynamic on the retail front, right? So in the municipalities where we have the 80 coffee shops, let's say, you know, the shops in Almere are doing great. Could someone get a license to open another coffee shop in that town, right? Because just again, for the audience, in these municipalities, all the coffee shops have to be in the program. It's not like just some of them are. But if things are working out, as you're saying, people coming into the licensed cities, let's call them, and the coffee shops doing well, could the government grant more licenses for coffee shops in the cities in the pilot? Do we know about that? Orville or Michael?
You have to look at the municipality, right? This is partially federally regulated and partially on a municipal level. So, for instance, some of the province or some of the municipalities that are in the experiment still have room on the number of coffee shops that are allowed in their municipality. So they set a maximum at the municipal level. Let's say the number is 15, and if the current number of coffee shops is 11, then technically there will be room for 4. Now you can imagine, as soon as the municipality opens up the application process of applying for a coffee shop, it is mayhem. Everybody wants to have a coffee shop in the Netherlands, especially now that they're fully legal. So it changed everything significantly, but there is room to add coffee shops in the municipalities, absolutely.
Right. And on the same point, are we seeing consolidation among the coffee shops, whether it's about those in the pilot or outside the pilot? Are they changing hands? Do we know?
Yes and no. You see movement, but actually, a lot of the coffee shops owners are excited for. They've been fighting for this for a long time, most of them, right? So to finally get to this point where everything is legal and they can go to a bank and do legal transactions with a bank, it makes a big difference for them as well. You can imagine in the previous political regime or the previous regulatory aspect of how to do these things, it wasn't always an easy job. So for them, life is changing as well, but there's multiple people with multiple coffee shop inside the experiment.
Right. Look, and again, I'm sorry to just stay on the point, but I've been receiving pictures, over the last month or two of different stores from our sources there. And they show, right, in their menus, the 7 suppliers. So obviously the system seems to be working. But again, going back to that question about comparing the shops outside the pilot program and those in the pilot program, we talked about incentives, right? Better quality, apparently, a safer product tested. Just go back to a question of pricing. Are these coffee shops going to have a price advantage or similar to the prices you would sell in a coffee shop outside the pilot? And the same question on assortment. Would they have more variety, not just on the hash front, in those shops outside the pilot compared to the ones in the pilot, or very similar?
So I'm going to reverse the question a little bit. If you look at innovation, I think that's the interesting approach to this. The innovation that we have, that we are familiar with within Canada, we have products here, we have made products that the Dutch consumer has never seen. So that truly excites me of all the innovation that we can bring for the Dutch consumer. We have a head start as being one of the largest producers in Canada, and also one of the most successful ones, probably the only one that's profitable. So I think that really excites me, having access to that knowledge internally, being able to bring that to the Dutch consumer. From a pricing perspective, the Dutch government has said very clearly, we do not want to see a drop in price. So the prices inside and outside the experiment are quite similar. The little bit of a difference is,
Think about that point that Orville just made. I mean, just another check in the box for how pragmatic and excellent the regulations are that the Netherlands is taking. So, and there's a reason for that. That's just to keep it. They don't want prices dropping. It ties into younger people and being consumers and so forth. So there's a lot of thought that goes behind the rationale as why that is on pricing.
Right. Michael, and again, for those who are not so familiar, obviously Village Farms, one of the many pluses the company has, right? More than 40 years of experience farming and growing the plant, growing well in farming in general, right? And more recently in cannabis. But in the case of Canada, you are running mostly in greenhouses. In Holland, it's going to be indoor. Talk about that transition, or that's something you know how to do anyway.
Well, in Quebec, we have an indoor facility. So, like the thing with the type of greenhouses, I mean, our greenhouses are incredibly sophisticated. They cost significant capital to build. They can do amazing things. It's just that we like using natural sunlight when we can. But I think we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt in Canada over the last 7-8 years that we are at the top of the echelon in producing quality, craft type quality. And so, we use greenhouses because it makes sense but we do have the indoor experience. And, if you can make it in a greenhouse, you can make it indoor. If you put the cost aside, there's a cost differential, of course. But the more that's in your control in growing any plant in a totally controlled environment gives you, it's a less riskier situation and gives you more tools to be able to reach the pinnacle of quality. So we do have that experience. In the Netherlands, because of certain things like odor control, we wanted to do an enclosed facility, so we were not having any issues with odor coming out of a facility for the local community. That was a big item for us. We've invested heavily in technology. So you could stand right outside the facility and smell nothing. So it's really amazing. So we do have that experience, and we can do both, and we will continue where it makes sense.
Right, understood. Just moving on now, Michael, the discussion to the financial upside, share what you can share, right? I understand we're not going to make outlook, provide forward guidance here, but just you're obviously very excited about the opportunity. On my math, it could make a significant impact on your EBITDA. But just share what you can share here, Michael, and remind us how
Look,
to report.
Pablo, as a NASDAQ SEC compliant company, we're segment reporting now. So
Right.
the Netherlands, Leli, Holland will be segment reporting. In fact, we're issuing early May our first quarter results. So you'll be able to clearly see what those results are in terms of revenue, gross margin, and ultimately EBITDA. Our initial thought pattern on the investment, because I think today it's kind of interesting. In other businesses, in my past history, I probably wouldn't take something to the board unless we were 80% sure of success. It's very difficult to do that in cannabis because there's so many unknowns. So we sort of vie for 50%. And that 50% based on the capital allocation here was based on the fact that we would at least get our money back at the end of phase one. That was very important for us. So we were, if worst case, we got our money back if the process did not continue past phase one. But I can tell you we're doing much better than that. We just took a very conservative approach. And we'll be revealing a lot of those numbers going forward.
Right.
And the first quarter wasn't a full production quarter. So really the second quarter will probably start telling the story. Right. And then you can interpolate on phase two when it comes online for the new year.
Right, and phase two would come online, early next year. And you said phase two implies about what, 3-4 times expansion?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost 4 times.
Just for the audience, we publish, for what it's worth, we publish a number on the Dutch pilot and analysis back in September 27th. The report is available. We did the math conservatively that this could represent about $5 million in EBITDA for Village Farms. We think that number is quite conservative, and that's assuming the 80 coffee shops right now, which could be increased, of course, over time. You put a multiple of 10 times on that, that's $50 million, right? Just from conservative assumptions on Holland, and the market cap of Village Farms right now, it's 60 million. So just, I guess, Michael, that's a positive. I'm going to flip the question back to you. Is like, I'm surprised, given what I think it's a great opportunity, that we're not seeing some of your direct NASDAQ-listed LP peers getting involved in Holland. And I know you cannot speak for them, but what are they missing?
What can I say? I mean, the whole industry is, it's shocking, really. I mean, where everyone is in this industry. So hopefully it'll be a turnaround. Really ties to just interest in getting institutional shareholders and more shareholders back in the market. I think the day will come. We're very fundamental focused. This industry, for the most part, at least in Canada, for the most part, has been really not based on, in my opinion, fundamentals of any other business that drives it, where it's cash flow, it's not about non-profitable market share. It's about positive cash flow, positive earnings, a decent or strong balance sheet. And I think that will resonate when we start seeing some more clarity. There's still a stigma tied to cannabis globally. And I think that'll change. And, not to talk about the US, but I'm very bullish on this current administration. There's a lot on their plate right now, but I think I feel much more confident going forward in the next year or so than I have been in the last 5 years. So the day will come, and we're just going to keep our nose to the grindstone, keep putting numbers up, keep expanding, making wise, prudent decisions on capital. Yeah. And I think it'll be a good place to be.
No, that's good. Look, I mean, just if I can, one last question on the financial upside. And I know you can't say much here, Can you talk about pricing and in Holland and how is that, relative to your expectations?
Pricing has been very tight. So what our forecasted pricing, we've met that. So we're very, it's different markets. So when you ask the pricing question, if you ask in a specific, whether it's Michigan or some other state or Florida or Canada as a whole, that question would be very appropriate because pricing is all over the place. But again, coming to the Netherlands where it's much more controlled and supported. Look, we have banking in the Netherlands. I mean, there's still, you can't even get banking in the US. So let's think about it. The banks are behind this as much as the government is. So, so you see all these things and you see stable pricing. And the pricing that we forecasted, we've hit that number.
Right.
And people will be able to interpolate that on our earnings going forward. So.
No, that's great. Orville, just moving on to the political side of things in terms of Dutch politics, remind us, is there an election upcoming? What are the current political winds there in terms of cannabis? How to think about how things could change for the pilot over the next 5 years. And I know it's hard to predict, right? It's a crystal ball question.
No, we just had a new government elected. I would say center-right. Probably the most right government we've had in a long time. But again, it's very difficult to predict the future. And it's even more difficult when you're trying to predict the future with cannabis. So I'm in no position to predict the future when it comes down to the political landscape. I can only look at what society is doing to a certain extent. And everybody that you explain the previous situation with having to grow cannabis illegally, but then being able to sell it legally, no one understands that. Not from a lawyer, not from a banker, not from an accountant. No one understands that process. So I can only say that the sentiment in society has really shifted towards full legalization, as it has in Germany, for instance. And obviously, the Dutch government will look at what Germany is doing as well, and the German government will look at what the Dutch government is doing. It's very difficult to predict politics. I want to stay very clear from that, to be honest. I can only say what society is currently seeing and the sentiment that lives in society.
But like you said, this is, the unlicensed model at retail, right? Or let's call it the allowed license model at retail has been going on since 1974. And we probably had some political changes over time, and that's been there. And now you have this improvement on top of that, which is this pilot program that makes it even more, I would say, safer, right? So in that sense, I think the downside is limited from a political standpoint in terms of.
Right, and if you look at Orville, he grew up in the Netherlands, so he said already 3 times the Dutch society, and what that's bigger than you think. It means that the government listens to the people, to the society, and regarding cannabis, they're listening. It's evident, and you see it. If you go to the U.S. at the federal level, who's listening to society? So again, a big difference, and that's one of the reasons we're bullish for this time frame and this jurisdiction right now. And that's what we have to do is pick, like on a chessboard, we have to pick exactly where we're going to be playing, what moves we're going to make as we wait and see what happens.
Right. Look, I'm going to take some questions from the audience here. I'm going to read some, but just answer only if you can, Michael or Orville. Someone is asking, in the Netherlands, the consumer is allowed to grow plants for personal use. In the pilot program, can Leli also sell seeds to consumers?
Orville will take that.
No, that's sadly not allowed. There will be a violation of the opium laws in the Netherlands. We cannot sell seeds to consumers. And obviously we have to abide by the law. Also, for the specific question, I would never recommend growing plants without lights, and growing under lights in the Netherlands is illegal, even at home. So I would not recommend doing that to begin with.
Right. Look, I'm going to ask another question that in a way we've touched on already, but it has to do with, concerns of potential oversupply in the future. Do you, in Holland, do you see it likely that in the future more municipalities will be added to the experiment, so oversupply will not become a problem for the current licensed producers in Holland? It's probably the other way around right now. Right now, probably.
I think it's the undersupply that's more the concern right now. And again, it comes back to the way they set it up with 10 license holders. And the 80 coffee shops, assuming that all the license holders are growing the capacity, the minimum base capacity we discussed earlier, then there's a great balance there. So we're not concerned with the oversupply that we've, if you compare it to the last few years in Canada, no way. So we feel very bullish where it's at.
Yeah.
It's also a question that's connected to quality, Paulo. If you want to grow in the value segment, right, the lowest quality, possibly, yeah, you're at risk there. But if you're in the higher quality segment, that is always strong demand for higher quality. We've seen that in Canada as well. And the quality that we're growing is that high quality craft, hang dried, hand trimmed, a lot of attention and detail going into the production of the cannabis. So it's a little bit different than growing mass scale.
Yeah.
Growing.
Yeah. Look, I mean, again, these are brief questions, brief answers, and maybe some of them are a bit in the weeds. In terms of the coffee shops outside the pilot program, I understand they can only stock about 500 grams of product in a store, right? Which is very small amount compared to what we see in dispensaries in North America. Does that rule apply to the shops in the pilot? And is a 500 gram limit a problem or not an issue really?
It's an old regulation, so it's no longer the rule for a coffee shop that's in the experiment. They can have a week of inventory now, because you can imagine the 500 grams never really worked. If anyone wonders why there's so many scooters or bikes going around, because the coffee shops are being supplied. So that rule is gone. And I've heard stories, but this is not from first-hand experience, obviously, that mayors are actually quite flexible with the inventory that a coffee shop can hold. So the coffee shop is basically telling the mayor how much inventory they would need to hold in order to be successful. So that rule has changed completely, which is a great thing.
Yeah, another good point.
Someone else asking on the subject of hash. You said in 2-3 months you can be producing hash. What's the experience of Village Farms producing hash?
Quite high, actually. First of all, I'm a big hash fan myself, so I have a few hobbies of making hash. Is one of them myself. We produce it in BC at a very high level, and we use it in some of our ancillary products. And then in Quebec, we are one of the bigger hash players as well for the products that we sell.
Right. Okay. No, that's great. Look, I know we're going to be running out of time here. We've covered a lot on the Dutch pilot. Michael, I'm going to just allow a few questions on other subjects, if I may. I realize the focus of the call is on Holland, but can you discuss your other sales businesses and opportunities outside North America? Just remind people, what else are you doing outside North America besides the Netherlands?
Well, we're always in exploratory mode, but let me remind everyone of the scorched earth of capital that was spent in the last 10 years all over, from South America, from Portugal, from Germany, Denmark. I mean, I could sit down and just go through a whole list of hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that was spent by folks making decisions, jumping the gun, not waiting to understand the game, the playing field, not understanding the regulations, the political theater. So we've always watched what others have done, and so far I think a lot of them have made mistakes. I don't know of many of those investments that have even come close to break even, if not shut down. So we don't take that approach. We want to know, we want to win. So we see huge opportunity in the EU emerging. But again, we want to drill down and be very clear that the toothpaste is not going back into the tube, and that things are changing before we make capital investments. But I can tell you, we are, totally in on cannabis, and that's the direction we're heading.
And on that point, Michael, I mean, if you want to expand that, I mean, when was the last time Village Farms issued stock here? It's probably been more than 2 years, right?
We haven't issued stock going on we're almost going on our third year. We haven't issued any stock, and we don't, raise. I mean, look, I could look at what goes on in the market. It just blows my mind when you hear people paying down debt but are doing an ATM, constantly diluting. I was the founder of Village Farms, and I'm still the largest shareholder today. And in those years, 35 years, I think we're at about 100 million shares outstanding. We have not done a consolidation. So we're very prudent with our approach. And I think that will come home to roost here going forward.
Right. And just stay on that point. I know, as you said, you've been more conservative, but you touched on the huge opportunity in Europe. Just expanding on the potential to maybe make acquisitions or investments in operators overseas, taking more control of your route to market there. I think you've said that in a lot of your B2B domestic sales in Canada are being re-exported as much as a third. Maybe you're leaving money on the table there, right? So I understand your conservative approach, but there's an opportunity for you to make more investments and take more ownership of your route to market overseas. Is that true? And how do you think about that?
Absolutely. We want to control the conduit. I mean, that's our goal. We've made minority investments in companies in Australia and in Germany, actually. So we're looking at the playing field there, seeing how it's sorting out, but we want to be controlling our destiny. So you're bang on, Pablo, with that question. That's about all I can say at this point.
Right. No, that's great. Look,
And the brands, I think what are we, number 1 and 3 brands in Germany today? Orville, is that correct? So, I mean, about our brand, we want to be great brand custodians and build our brands internationally. And that's something we'll be focused on going forward this year and into next year. So we're going to be quite aggressive going forward on our investments looking forward when we feel the right time is.
Right. Look, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Orville, but in terms of what Michael said about those 3 brands in Germany, do you want to give more color? Are we talking strains or brands? I mean, it's not Pure Sunfarms being sold in Germany, right? But only if you can answer and want to answer. The focus.
Well, it's a combination of the two, right? So through our German partners, so we do both. So we do very, very well with our strains, with our genetics in Germany at the moment. So it's hard to keep it on the shelf in Germany when we talk to our German partners, and it's a combination of the two. So it's a combination of the brand that we are, and it's slowly moving globally with the genetics that we have and the way we cultivate. So the current demand domestically that we see is very high, but the current demand internationally going into Germany or the other 4 countries, 5 countries in total is very, very high at the moment.
Right. Michael, I'm gonna just one last question here from the audience. Only answer if you can. Someone asking, can you speak to the Mexican tomato tariffs announced yesterday?
Well, that's a suspension agreement that goes back forever. I think, what I'm looking for is I think it's really the end of NAFTA at some point in time. And hopefully the playing field will even up. But this suspension agreement is sort of something that was put in place by tomato field growers years ago. And in the last 30 years, the fresh tomato consumption that at the retail level has gone from 90% field product to 90% greenhouse product in 1 generation. So the suspension agreement is an old rule, and I think it'll help U.S. producers for sure. But ultimately, I think we still want to wait and see how it's going to be played out. And again, the U.S. tomato market, the multi-billion-dollar market that it is most of the capacity comes from our adjacent countries, Mexico and Canada. So I think there's a big push by the USDA to push forward U.S. production for all types of farming products. So we'll wait and see how it goes.
Right. Look, before we move to closing remarks, maybe Orville, just one last question in terms of, April 7th was just like what, less than, a week ago, right? So it's, but I think you've touched on how the government is keeping a close eye on everything, right? How the enforcement, are the stores compliant, pricing, that should give confidence to consumers out there and even to investors that this should be successful. But just remind the audience about how, is the government tracking pricing, for example, if you can touch on things like that in terms of the 80 shops.
Yeah, the government is actively tracking pricing, actively tracking inventory. We're going to be audited again next week when I'm there. So there's a lot of activity going on from the government. The government is the first one to admit that they're still learning as well when we're doing it together, but they're actively monitoring inventory plus pricing.
Right, that's great. Okay, I very much appreciate all your answers here, Michael and Orville, all the color you've given. I don't know if you want to make any closing remarks, Michael, but again, thank you very much for taking the time to both of you. And congratulations on all the progress that you're making, of course.
Thank you, Pablo. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
All right.
Thank you so much, Pablo.
Okay. Everyone, have a good day. Thank you very much to our speakers. Thanks. Bye.